Good morning from day 3 in quarantine, also known as Thursday, after having landed on Monday, December 14th in Australia. And this is this morning's view. It's looking pretty good. I think we're scheduled for rain later today, but for a morning view to wake up to, no fog this morning, it looks pretty good. Just wanted to show you what I spend way too much of my time each day doing is looking at the men building a building down below me. I can see why 3-year-olds are fascinated with it, and as an adult in quarantine it's equally fascinating. Anyway, that's the view for this morning. Excuse me a moment while I turn the camera around, which takes me a little bit of doing here. I'm just gonna... Alright, so come have a seat on my chair, and today I'm going to just clarify a few things and add a few tidbits to my talk yesterday, which was quite a long video, so I'll keep it relatively short this morning. The first thing was when I talked about scarcity and how expensive the flights are. I think it's particularly hard for Australia and New Zealand right now because they've capped the number of people that can come into the country. So Sydney takes in more people than any other city in Australia, and we're at less than 400 people per day can enter the country from overseas, and that's on all the flights combined. And the airlines have to manage that, so that's why there was only 30 people on my flight coming from New Zealand to here, because that's as many as Air New Zealand was allowed to bring in as part of that cap. And Air New Zealand, as a result, has adjusted their flight schedule, as I'm sure many other airlines have as well. So they only have one flight a week that goes from LA to Auckland, and then one quarantine flight to each of the cities, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Sydney, coming off of that flight. And as a result of this New Zealand travel bubble, Air New Zealand is now offering flights that are non-quarantine flights, and that's for New Zealand residents only. So one thing I didn't mention when I got to the LA airport, I had to fill in another travel declaration, and that was with the Australian government on their website. And basically it told me I wasn't eligible for a quarantine-free flight, which I already knew. And I think it's more for the people that are on quarantine-free flights. They have to fill in that declaration and show the QR code to say yes, they were eligible. Because no one asked me for my QR code because I wasn't trying to not go into quarantine. So that's sort of some of the scarcity. So when I got to LA, they checked my passports again and had me fill in that declaration. I also mentioned the mask wearing being mandatory in the LA airport. Mask wearing was mandatory from the time I entered the Vancouver airport to roughly 34 hours later when I got back to my hotel room here in Sydney. And so that was a long time wearing a mask with only taking it off for meals. So I was pretty happy to get the mask off and don't have to wear a mask for 2 weeks now, so that's great. And apparently I don't need to wear a mask a whole lot outside in Australia either. We did have a couple new cases pop up in Sydney yesterday, so that's the first time in a few weeks that there's been any cases. One was an airport worker, but the other two they don't know the link to yet, so we'll see what happens with that by the time I get out of quarantine. The other thing I was going to mention, and it was just little things that I saw in the LA airport that I thought were interesting. One was that LA airport is doing its best to save power, and so they had all of the movators, the moving sidewalks were all turned off. So you thought carefully about when you wanted to move from the restaurant area down to your departure gate, way down a long hallway because those movators weren't on, so it was a long walk. The walking was fine, but just something that was interesting in the airport. The other thing that I saw was a woman waiting for her Chengdu flight, and she had created her own little isolation cubicle with an umbrella. So she had an umbrella over her head, and to the umbrella she had taped around the edges of the umbrella long sheets of plastic that were all taped together. So she was basically in a little plastic cylinder. The sheets went down to about mid-calf length, and she had a little baby with her inside her little umbrella isolation cubicle. So I thought that was sort of amusing and interesting. That's about all the other little things I wanted to mention. Tomorrow I'll talk to you about the healthcare professionals that keep ringing my room, and COVID testing while in quarantine. And I will see you then. We'll give you one last view of the harbor, because who doesn't like a view of the harbor? Especially on a pretty day like today. Full on harbor view. Alright, talk to you tomorrow.